Okay, so I'm very happy to host this meetup today before the .js this Monday. So just for the numbers, how many of you are going to .js this Monday? Cool. So happy to see a lot of people coming to this meetup that are not regular people coming. So I want to thank you, the sponsor. So the sponsor is absolutely new. It's Vue.js. It's a website where you can find jobs, freelance, part-time, full-time, and they are sponsoring the meetup. At the moment, they are giving us stickers, and in the future, it may be about advertising and other things. So thanks to them for the stickers today. Thanks to the host for hosting us. I'm not going to add anything else. So I was saying, I'm going to talk about scaling application with Vue and Firebase. So just to start, how many of you know about Firebase? Great. How many of you have used vuefire? Okay, that's cool, because I'm going to introduce a lot of basic stuff and then go into a bit more advanced stuff. So that's great, I can use something. Okay, my name is Eduardo. You can call me Ed. I won't even tell you my last name because it's too long. I'm a core team member of Vue.js. I organize a meetup here in Paris. And I also maintain vuefire and created vuefire, among other libraries that are not very popular anyway. And I love building stuff. When you build stuff, you usually start by a POC, a proof of concept, when you want to prove a concept. And you have to go fast when you're building a POC, because the point is to prove this concept as fast as possible so you can go further and get serious. And sometimes these lead to an MVP, but I'm going to talk about that a bit later. So a POC, generally, you have many days, you have an idea, and you want to build that idea, and it may fail. Then you're just going to throw away mostly everything you built, or it succeeds. So when it succeeds, the question you're going to ask yourself is my code reusable? How much of it can I reuse? Because you're going fast, that's cool, but we all build spaghetti code when creating POCs. There is no shame in that. Because we also have made the mistake of reusing that spaghetti code even if we thought we wouldn't. Because we say, nah, we're going to throw that away anyway, so it's okay to do spaghetti code, but at the end, you're always going to use some parts and you're going to mess up your code, and then 1 year later, this guy is going to say, but what is this shit in the code here? Who would read that? And he's going to blame with Git, and he goes, find your face anyways. And you're going to have a dispute. So the good point about Vue is that you can reuse very easily what you have. It's a green framework. You can recycle what you create, because you can divide your application into multiple components very early stages of your application. And these components are just usable as you build them. You just import them in your new project. But when you build an MVP, because sometimes after a POC you succeed on the POC, and you're going to build a minimal viable product. So you want to prove that the product is viable. And this time, you go a bit further. This gets more serious. You usually use a boilerplate or a CLI to scaffold your project. You may even add tests to test your components and everything, because after all, it's going to be a real project in many weeks or some months, depends. So the process is pretty much the same. You have some stuff you build with a POC, and you're going to iterate over it, and it may fail or it may succeed. And if it succeeds, you're going to reuse some part of them. So you either throw parts of the code you built, or you ship it. And most of the time, you're just going to do a mix of both. So you're going to refactor your code, actually. But this time, when it comes to reusable code, you're going to cry if you haven't done it. Because as a matter of fact, if you build your application in jQuery, then it turns out to be an SPA, you're just going to throw away everything because you're going to choose a proper framework to do that. And that's not cool. So the thing here is I like to start building my application with the right tools, because that way I can reuse the code and waste less time. So Vue already does that very easily. Firebase does this, but it's a bit more complicated to do that. So what is Firebase? Firebase, in all this, When do you use it? So you have some collaboration tools where you want all your clients to be synced at the same time, or you have some kind of database anyways. This is when Firebase comes in handy, otherwise you don't have to use it if you don't need it. So Firebase is a backend as a service. That means that you have the infrastructure. You have a free plan you can use for small application actually, and then it scales alone. You just have to pay more. What does it offer? So it offers you authentication, real-time database, hosting, storage, cloud messaging, which is used for push notifications, and many other things, among them an SDK to code on many platforms, one of them on the web, obviously. So I'm going to focus on the real-time database because that's the part I want to talk about, the more interesting for us when we're building UIs. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the difference with Firebase. In a classical application, when you query the database, you have all your clients that query the database at a given time. But this query gives you the state of the data at that given time. This means that if the data changes and one client queries the data again, it's going to have a different state than the other client. This is not the case for Firebase because you can query the database, but you're not going to query most of the time. You're going to subscribe to the data. So you have this kind of two-way relationship. The Firebase is going to push some kind of, is going to call the callbacks with a socket. So this way you can make the client handle the update of the data and have a local copy, and all the clients are always synced. This is amazing for user experience. So how does it look like? Firebase is a NoSQL database, but without arrays. And this is very important because it makes things so much harder at the beginning to model by, because we don't have rows, but you don't have arrays. You don't have an order. You have to specify the order by the child, and we'll see that later. The data looks like that. So it's basically a JSON, but with arrays, without arrays. Sorry. You have to-dos, which is the child of the root database, and then we have 1, 2, 3, which are 3 childs of the to-do. And then we have the values, which are len view, len Firebase build things. About querying, so the basic stuff. Querying in Firebase is quite special. It's very, you won't like that if you have done SQL in your life before because it's just so much worse. But it has some benefits. We'll talk about that. You always need that reference. Usually you're going to get that reference to the top leaf, to the root of your database, and then you're going to go down. So this way I'm getting the to-do child, which is what we saw before, and then using that reference, I'm listening for an event one time only because I'm querying, which is the value event. This returns a promise. I just consume, and then I then that, and I get the value, and I can also get the key. Although we won't be using that very much, or maybe never, it's important to know you can query in Firebase. Most of the time, what you're going to do is add an event listener, because this way you can react to what changed. And the callback is called whenever the value changes and whenever the value updates. And this means that if another client updates the database, you're going to receive the update. So pretty much the same, except that we have a none instead of a once. And I added the key because sometimes we need the key, but you also have that obviously in the previous example. Okay, so as you may imagine, this is what we saw before is cool for objects, but there is a problem with arrays, because if you have, if you want to model your data as an array, which you probably want to in any kind of application, if any child or any property of any child is modified, you're going to receive the whole object, so in this case, the to-dos, in your callback. This means that you are wasting a lot of bandwidth. And this is very important because you are paying for it. So if you waste your bandwidth, you're going to need to pay more, and you don't want that. But you can easily avoid that by using other kinds of events, which are the child events. The child's events, which are the added, removed, changed, and moved events, allows you to pretty much do some logic on your side, but to only let to go through the bandwidth the minimal information, the minimal data. So the child added event is pretty basic. When something is added, you're going to get that child with the key for and the value, ship them. And the remove is the same, but when you remove an element, the change is when something in the child change. And the move event is a bit different because it only applies when you have some kind of order query, which is order by something. In this case, I'm using order by price, order by child price. So when I query the elements, the child added events are going to be called in a specific order, and this is very important. But since we change the price value on on our childs, this is going to go to the top. And this is when the child move event comes in play. First, we're going to have the change event to notify me that the data change, and then we're going to have this event to change to tell us that the child moved, so we can move it in our local copy to the top. But now we can integrate that to Vue, right? So if we have a component, we just have to add to the created hook a listener. We have to save that listener on a variable, and then we have to destroy it. And of course, we have to do that for the 4 events I showed you before, and we have to repeat that for every single property, every single data we want to sync, which is is not optimal, I would say. Because when we work with Vue, we have this workflow with this data-driven flow, which is amazing to work with as a front-end developer. You can focus on the data and how you use the data in the UI. And you don't have to worry about how the data updates. You don't have to worry how it's watched, if it's going to be optimized or something. This Vue handles all that for you. So in a user workflow, this looks like that. You have your data, Vue consumes it, and gives you to your UI. And what we just built is kind of something like that. So we have our Firebase database that gives us some data. Then we are processing the data with all our events. We are creating a local copy, and this is the data that goes to Vue, and then we can use it. Well, that's absolutely bad because you cannot focus on creating the great user experience as you would usually. What I want to have is I have a reference, I give that reference to Vue, and then Vue communicates, create the listeners for us, remove them when they need it. And so I have only to worry about the reference and what is watched. This is when vuefire comes into play. So it's exactly what it does. It creates the listener for you and removes them when the object is destroyed, etc. Okay, so this is all you need to get the to-dos when you're using vuefire. Also, you have to install the plugin, obviously, but I won't show that. It's not necessary. You have a Firebase property when you can add as any key the variable you want to have on your data, which in this case is to-dos, and then we pass a reference. This is a Firebase reference. It's something we retrieve from the SDK. It's very important. And then what we have is an array of the values. Now, we always have objects. This is very important. The reason is that we have some attributes that we always want to know. So the dot key is the key that is stored on the database. In our case, it was 1, but Firebase can generate it. It can generate its own keys that are unique. And they look something like minus, kn, and random letters. The dot value here is because we don't have an object. We have a string. So when we have a Boolean string or a number, we have this dot value, which is the way we retrieve the value. But usually, what we have is an object with more properties. So for instance, if instead of having just the string learn view, I have in the database an object with the text property and then learn view, I will have the same object merge with the dot key attribute. So exactly as you would expect, so you can build things as if they were in your data, which is kind of handy. But this is not enough because sometimes you really want these objects to bind somewhere. You do not always need arrays. And this is also possible, of course. So you have the source, which is the reference. Then you have as object, which is just a Boolean that you're going to put a true. And you have this console callback. So this console callback is basically a callback that is called whenever there is an error. For instance, if you add some reading or writing rights, and the user who is trying to update some data doesn't have the access, then this callback is going to be fired, and you can add some errors on the UI or whatever. So about updating the database, because we have only seen how to query, how to read the database, but updating the database is something that we're going to do if we want to create a real-time application. Now, vuefire doesn't add any abstraction layer for that, because you can you can work with the already existing SDK, although it could be possible to watch for changes on the data. But I won't talk about that in the slide, but you can ask me a question about it if you want. So the most intuitive thing to do is we have our to-do list, and inside a method, you are just going to push an element. Well, you're going to be very disappointed, because this not only is going to put your client in an inconsistent state, but it's not going to spread across all the clients, because what you are doing here is modify your local data, your local copy of the database. And what you have to do actually is to use the reference, use the SDK. So here I'm using the Firebase refs, which is a special variable that is stored in every Vue instance that have some references, some Firebase references. And then I get the to-do, which is the one I gave in the Firebase configuration object. And then I get the ref. This is very important, because sometimes you are using a query, and where you're using a query, you cannot just push things to them, because it's not a reference, it's a query. And then use the push, and this is where things get normal. The same thing happens, well, not the same things, but there is another caveat with setting data, with updating data. So usually you would like to update the text property, for instance, of our to-do. We're going to do that, the first thing. So we're going to get the child, we're going to do, I want the one with the to-do with the key 1, and I'm going to set the text to conquer the world, for instance. Well, the problem with that is that we're actually erasing the content and replacing the whole child with this new child. So if the object had any other properties like an author or a date, these are going to be erased and removed. So what we want to do is always access the deepest child we want to modify. This is very important. So you can do that with a / separated path. It's the easier way to do it. You can also append many child calls, it's the same. And then you can just set the value as you normally would. Okay, time to talk about security, because when you're building your application at the beginning, you just don't care, because you're just going to run that locally or in a private network anyway. But once you start building an MVP, you're going to care a little about security concerns. So security in Firebase are defined by rules. Now this is the console, the Firebase console. This is the rules tab in the real-time database, where you can view your rules, which is actually a JSON file. A JSON file with some kind of JavaScript inside. It's pretty curious. And you can use a simulator, which is very handy to test your rules, to see if you can write as a specific user, if are authenticated, etc. Since you may have changed your rules during development to make the things easier, like for instance, setting everything to true so you don't have any security rules, you really want to change the rules in the future. So at the very least, you have to enable authentication. This means that no one can read or write, well, at least write, that's the very least, if they have not been authenticated. But you can do better than that. You usually want to version your rules, and you can do that. Using the Firebase tools, you can retrieve the content of an application. So the Firebase tool is just a CLI you can install globally with npm or yarn. and then use Firebase in it, so it creates many files that reference your project, so we know what to deploy in the future. And this way, you can version your rules.json, which is very important in my opinion. But it's not enough, because you may want to test. To test, there is a module called Targaryen, like Game of Thrones, that parses your rules with esprima, and doesn't need that Firebase connection. That's very important, and you will know when you start testing applications that have Firebase. Usually you have many Firebase databases, one for development, one for the staging, another for the production, etc. The problem with that is not only that you need an internet connection, but that it's going to add some delay to every test you do. And if you mock, you cannot mock Firebase because it's just too big, and the Google team has not done so yet. But if you can at least mock the rules testing, well, that's a lot, because it's quite a very important part of the application testing if someone can read something. And making those tests run almost instantly is going to make you gain so many hours. So also, when building your rules, you may not want to use that JSON format with JavaScript strings inside of it. You may want to use something like that. So this is a format called Bolt. It's built by the Firebase team. They say it's experimental, but at least they are working on it. It's actively being developed. The syntax looks a lot like TypeScript. And what is actually cool, what I personally like the most, is that you can define types and you can reuse those types across your different rules, and this is great. And then, in order to use that, you just have to call the Bolt CLI to convert that to a JSON file, and you're ready to go. Okay, and I wanted to say a last word about Vuex. So when you are using the database in many components, you may want to use Vuex. There is a plugin, vuefire, at the moment. It's ongoing under some deep API changes that match Vuex2 API, so I'm not going to talk about that, but you can come later to me and ask me a question, or just visit the GitHub. There is an issue about the API changes. So to summarize everything, when you use Firebase on a project with Vue, use vuefire. Don't implement all that by yourself. You're going to lose a lot of your time. And anyways, you're going to need some kind of abstraction in the future. So just use something that already exists. Update using the references, and always use child to access the deepest child possible. And version your rules, and always test them. Happy hacking. Thanks.
Can we set up things like access control list and let only some users access some of the data and not other users?
Okay, so the question was, can you set up rules to access some very specific data by specific users? Yeah, the answer is obviously yes. So you also have validation rules, by the way. When you access to the authentication, you can just query inside your rules your Firebase database. This means that you can access the user database and check if they have the appropriate rights to write in or read anything in your database.
Que la famille.